Hey, you believers, non-believers, unaffiliated believers, sort of believers, and even you think I'm a believers, welcome to the Uncensored Unprofessor. This is a podcast where we welcome converts, but where we think like disciples, especially today we'll think like disciples. And this is a show where we do our best to apply theologic to all of life. If you've listened to me before, you know I use the phrase PoMo frequently. Today I want to give you the 411 on PoMo.
Oh, I do love it when you break out with some slangy slang.
Lately I've been doing the side A portions of my cast o' the pod on culture. Culture's powerful. Culture aligns or defies Christ and his claims. Culture is alive. And with technological precision, literally now, it sculpts souls. And then, because it's so frustrating, I've been going through the specifics of how our God-forsaking culture is punishing we everyday citizens. But today, I want to get meta with you. I want to go back up to the 30,000-foot level. I want to share some philosophy with you. My listener, I'd like to ask you a question. Do you have friends who say, "Oh, I don't want to think or talk about culture or politics or morals because this is just the same old historical dynamic playing out. First the pendulum swings liberal, then conservative, then liberal, then conservative, and this is just one more instance of that typical American political bog, and me, I'm done with wading through it." Do you have friends like that? Their eyes glaze over when you talk about wokeism or whatever Joe Biden recently mumbled. Me? Yes, I have friends like that. But this is not that. This is not the typical American to and fro, and so today I want to share with you what makes this sinister. Progressives are not just Democrats gone a notch further to the left. It goes deeper. It's deeply philosophical. This era is really new. Since World War II, and for a good 50 to 60 of those 75 post-World War II years, the GOP and the Dems were on the same philosophical ground. They mostly shared the same perspective on life and society, human rights, history, the fabric of America. But that's no longer the case. Why? Well, it has to do with philosophy. Or, because philosophy is defined as the love of wisdom, we are now in a decidedly philosophophobic historical era, the philosophophobic, the hate of wisdom. And it all started, I'm asserting, following other historians, in the Renaissance. The Renaissance, French, renaître, rebirth, the Renaissance began to put mankind, not God, as the center of the universe. Now, I gotta tell you, I'm a fan of Renaissance art. I love studying and admiring Renaissance art. I yearn for the day when we have artists again in society who once again make truly beautiful art like they were in the Renaissance. But the Renaissance, and to be fair, yeah, it has its own historic antecedents. I'm not going to unpack those today. The Renaissance opened up new ways to perceiving reality, again, apart from God. And I should be careful. The Renaissance was not a movement that was at odds with God or his existence. It wasn't trying to remove God from the reality equation. It was just looking at things from a new perspective, looking at things for themselves. Oh, it's so easy to just sweepingly vilify the past, right? We here on the UU want to be more nuanced. But the Renaissance birthed multiple later philosophic offspring, the Enlightenment, different kinds of naturalistic pantheisms, also known as German idealism, the things that spilled out of Spinoza and Hegel. They were appropriating Platonism and reworking that. And then there was the Romantic movement and American pragmatism, existentialism. All of that spilled out and morphed and recombined and got passed over into what is today known as postmodernism. And those who embrace, whether tacitly or consciously, those who embrace postmodernism I call PoMos. PoMo is my abbreviation for postmodern. Just what is postmodernism? Well, you can imagine. The definitions get laborious. Let me put it to you in direct terms. Foundationally, and this is the crux, postmodernism believes all truth is local, all truth is constructed. So, truth is one thing over in Florence, Italy, and another thing down in Buenos Aires. Truth means one thing to Christians and another to Buddhists. It's all local. Nothing is universally true. But no matter how you slice it, the issue for postmodernism is truth. Is there a capital T truth? No, that does not exist. Instead, postmodernists argue that they're intellectuals argue it, or it's just assumed by billions of folks who assume postmodernism's claims. They think it's true even though they've never once thought it through. But whether it's assumed or unconscious, they argue that each community constructs truth, little t, truth, as they see it.
Oh, true dat. Live your own truth, bro. And if you can't live it, at least pursue your own truth. I mean, oh, that's so deep.
But there's no one abidingly true perspective. Nothing is true, the postmodernists say. Nothing is true for everyone everywhere. And that's the gist of it. There is no capital T truth. I'd go into the role language plays in all this, but that's not essential today. Postmodernists argue and assume that all claims to capital T truth, all claims to capital T truth are already untrue, and so they believe such claims are raw power grabs. Now, never mind that saying there is no such thing as capital T truth is itself already a cynical assertion regarding capital T truth, right? I mean, we see again why, at fundamental levels, that doublespeak is not only at the core of postmodernism, it is its very core. You can't assert there is no such thing as capital T truth without having asserted the capital T truth that there is no capital T truth. They want to have it both ways. Their very foundation is illogical doublespeakism. But again, as we're witnessing in the public square, the PoMos try to have it both ways on every single thing they demand. Science is real, but girls can be boys. The nation state is bad, except for poor nations. Come on, they're pure and noble. All religions are true, while none of them really are. Only whites can be racists. National walls and borders are imperialist boundaries, but not postmodernist front door deadbolts. We could go on, the list is almost endless, and it is entirely consistent in that there is no consistency. Now, you and I know it must be that way, right? Once you say there's no capital T truth, what is left? And I'll concede, at least on this point, that the postmodernists are right. If there's no capital T truth, then all that's left is power. And so, what do we hear the PoMos constantly bitching about? Power. What is the single impulse for their policies, rules, their iconoclasm? Power. What do they accuse every opponent who obstructs their power grabbing of doing? Power grabbing. I mean, a few high-blown postmodernist philosophers were honest about their aim, which was power. Michel Foucault was pretty honest about it, but most of them hide their motives, and again, the average tacit PoMo citizen of the world is utterly unaware that they think this way, even though they do. But the point is, the Democratic Party is now entirely postmodern. There is not one leading Democrat who stands against the fundamental illogic of postmodernism. I mean, Tulsi Gabbard tried and now she's out. Sadly, even old Joe Manchin bribed for 30 pieces of silver flowing through a West Virginia pipeline. Even old Coal Chin Manchin has finally capitulated to the culturally regnant philosophy of postmodernism. No, the traditional liberals are being eaten by the PoMos. The PoMos are canceling and driving into hiding the traditional liberals, people like Alan Dershowitz, Dave Rubin, J.K. Rowling, Dave Chappelle, Bill Maher, Woodrow Wilson, Maggie Sanger. They are all now on the cannibalized bone pile of progressivism. Why? Why that? Why eat your own? 'Cause the old liberals still believed in capital T truth. Progressives, PoMos, will not tolerate the presence of anyone who believes in capital T truth, including their forebears, the liberals. Postmodernism eats its own. And so, again, what does this mean? It means we are awash in doublespeak. And how does that regularly play out? Well, I want to give you a few ways. First, by their arguing and putting into practice, the means justify the ends. A PoMo is free to lie because literally they think there is no real truth to begin with, but secondarily because if lying helps them reach their preferred future, holding power, then lying is justified. And of course, the genius of their constant lying is it works because truth exists. Most of the world still believes in truth, so lying as a means to an end still works, right? I mean, if the world no longer believed in truth, then no one would believe anything what anyone said, and that'd be a hard way to do civilization. Well, actually, it'd make civilization impossible, and everyone would become a screeching rhetorical bomb thrower, kind of like a college-aged PoMo. Speaking of college, here's another example of PoMoism and doublespeak in words. Universities are, and now society in that wake is, redefining words. Why? To satisfy the pressure of PoMos. Here's an example. Racism. Traditionally, racism was defined as the belief or attitude or expression of those that one race was better than or certain races are worse than others. Today, racism is redefined as a matter of power. Only those in power can be racists, or in effect, only a white person can be a racist. Now, clearly, that's a tip of the cap to a fundamentally Marxist worldview, which Marx made everything about power. And by that Marx-laden definition, goodness, you guys, there's no place that is more racist than a university. As an intentional act of power, they give preference to certain races over others, diminish some in favor of others. It's quite ugly. So, we're watching postmodernism in a raw power grab redefine words. Or another way this plays out constantly in the public square, accuse your opponent of exactly what you yourself are doing. Confuse the sheeple by accusing your opponent of exactly what you yourself are doing, 'cause who would think to do that? No one of good conscience. But a PoMo doesn't have to have a conscience because that would presume morality exists. But because truth doesn't exist, neither can morality. And this, I have to confess to you, this is where I'm constantly left with my mouth gaping open at Christians who throw all in with postmodernism. And by my estimation, one half of all confessing or those who say they're Christians, they've now thrown in with the primary tenets of postmodernism. They're fine with saying there is no final morality. The other day, I read about a pastor. She was defending the right to abortion, she said, precisely because she was a Christian. And I thought to myself, what is her root? PoMo philosophy. Not the gospel of Christ, not God as creator, but PoMo philosophy. She, like something like half of the church, was trading an identity in the resurrected Christ for being liked. She was trading the biblical Christ for a PoMo cultural accommodation because no truth equals no morality. And a gospel without morality is a lie from the pit of hell. Because a God who has no moral character is a demonic archon, an archangel of light. Anyway, you guys, there's some PoMoism for you. In a nutshell, it stands in fierce opposition to the eternal Christ who claimed to be the Son of the Jewish Yahweh, Jesus Christ who claimed to be the way, the truth, and the life. And that's why this is nothing like the traditional left versus right, Democrat versus Republican wrestle of past American history. And again, please hear me, I'm in no way claiming the GOP is noble or altogether upright. But the progressives mean to eat, and they mean to eat it all. Gersh, they'll eat their own. So what do we think they'll do to those who refuse to recite their holy creeds? Throw them in prison under the false charges of insurrection, January 6th committee. No, this is a dark day. And like I mentioned in a past episode, it began in earnest when their 100% certain presidential candidate lost in 2016. A big business, hair-combed over rat climbed onto the throne they just knew belonged to their destiny. And ever since, the rush to power has been on. Climate change. So far we've learned that climate studies are profoundly complicated. At the top of the list of things that affect climate, the intensity of the sun's rays shining onto Earth, which create heat waves, or worse, it can create ice ages. And what can we do about the intensity of the sun? Nothing. So what do we hear about the sun's rays in politically charged speeches about climate change? Nothing. So there's an intentional ignoring that's going on for power and money, and those ignorings matter. But back to climate change. What a sprawling topic, right? And it's a lot like what I heard Jordan Peterson say about it. It's about everything. Climate change is a topic that's about everything. It's about the philosophy and integrity of science, the existence and shining of the sun's rays blasting away cosmic dust, the Earth's wobbly orbit, and that through our galaxy, the existence and density of water vapor, the knowledge of prevailing trade winds, geology, geochronology, geochemistry, sedimentology, plate tectonics, paleontology, glaciology, oceanography, ecology, archaeology, and history, and now we need to try to account for how human activity everywhere on the planet is at work. We have to consider China, by far the greatest polluter on the planet, and Russia and India are all at work, not just the USA, and how all of that affects the planet. All of that is involved in climate change.
Well, I think you, Mr. forgot money.
That's so true. I was thinking about pure science, not the science that dances to the tune of governmental grants. So, when you're talking about something as sensitive, as complicated, as complex as current climate and climate across Earth's history, you not only need many tools, you have to account for many slices of reality. But what, again, do we hear from that constant siren song called climate change? Stop driving your car and quit heating your home to 70 degrees in the winter, you greasy fat pig. It's reductionistic, strategically reductionistic. Not the greasy fat pig part, I made that up. The it's all your fault part. And you certainly know this, but I'm gonna say it anyway. Earth's climate has always been changing. There have been 143 million year long warming spans and 11 million year long spans of ice age. All manner of things seem to affect the climate, including volcano explosions. And during the Roman era, say from 250 BC to 450 AD, the average global temperature was 35 degrees Fahrenheit higher than today. That was an era of global warming. And guess what? Scientist Plimmer informs us during that Roman era, Earth's population increased. There was more wealth produced, and warm climate agriculture could be undertaken in areas at much higher latitudes and altitudes than now. Forests expanded. This Roman warming could not be due to human emissions of CO2, end quote. Earth's climate changes, frequently to our good. So the amount of time on Earth that mankind has been here is minuscule. And it's very short-sighted to base a climate policy based on how long we've been on Earth. And as I said an episode or two ago, there has not been an increase in average global temperatures in the last 2 decades. And all that's despite how much CO2 we people have put into the atmosphere. Climate expert Ian Plimmer says that we are currently living in an interglacial, which means in between ice ages, and variable climate. Over the last couple 100,000 years, these interglacial periods have lasted around 13,000 years at a time, and it was during one of these warmer periods that human beings first showed up on the archaeological record in East Africa. That's all stuff Plimmer's unpacking. But the point is, the planet's not burning up. I said during a hot summer, right? The planet's not burning up. We need to take a deep breath and think more and study more acutely. Because, guys, the truth is, despite all the coordinated climate change alarmism, we are not on the verge of annihilation. We're not even close regarding the forces of nature to the edge of destruction. And the truth is, in all of human history, life has never been better for the human race. Humanity has never had it so collectively good. We should be grateful for how good we have it. Gratitude. Gratitude needs to be expressed, or it's just an internal thought, a private reflection. You can express gratitude through acts of appreciation, or more easily, you can share gratitude with words. Today, my sincere thanks to all my monthly Patreon supporters. I do not take your partnership for granted. Thanks, all of you. My listener, you want to join the team? Want to get my weekly show transcripts, footnoted and documented? Go sign up for a monthly pledge at Patreon of $5 or $13 or $27.77. Those pledges help me pay for my producing the weekly cast o' the pod. Today I want to think with you about ice. Ice is a standard part of careful discussions on climate change. Let's talk about ice sheets and glaciers. Glaciers are rivers of ice that flow due to gravity. And first on glaciers, let me note a few fun facts. On the continental United States, Mount Rainier at 14,410 feet in Washington state has the most glaciers. Not surprisingly, Alaska has the most glaciers in America, and most of those began to form during the Little Ice Age of about 700 years ago. The oldest glacier on Antarctica may be 1 million years old. Ice sheets, get this, ice sheets cover approximately 10% of Earth's land surface, and sea ice covers 7% of the Earth's entire surface. An ice field has to be a minimum of 25 acres in size to be counted as a glacier. I don't know who has the authority to declare that, but it must feel great to wield that kind of power. Still, get this, glaciers are blue tinged because of the way light moves through them. The red light, that is the long wavelengths, get absorbed by ice. The blue light, short wavelengths, get scattered and transmitted. And this was related to glaciers, so I'm going to share this one with you. Mastodons, which lived during the younger Dryas glacial era, and I'm going to look more carefully at that later in the show, mastodons may well have ceased to exist because they were overhunted by the Clovis peoples of the Americas. I know, right? Should we, in the name of all things woke, work a post-mortem shaming of the Clovis tribes for killing off all the mastodons? Oh, man. What if I sold on the UU webpage, I could have owned a mastodon bumper stickers? Somebody help put that together for me. I could have owned a mastodon. We might have mastodons in Yellowstone Park if it weren't for those greedy Clovis people. Oh, man. By the way, and now I'll be serious, they're named the Clovis tribes for a series of unique elongated spearheads that were found in Clovis, New Mexico back in 1932. And scholars don't know whether the Clovis peoples came by foot from Siberia over the Bering Strait or on boats from Europe, because now they've found similar ochre smeared, red color smeared, unique spears. They've been unearthed over in France. Oh, and I got to give you one more fun fact. Get this. Only about 2.1% of the Earth's water is frozen inside glaciers. And man, was I ever surprised to know that 1% of all the Earth's water was frozen inside Justin Trudeau's thick skull. All of that to say, yes, glaciers are fascinating. But the pertinent, icy question facing us today, are glaciers around the planet melting? And the answer is overall, yes. Is humanity causing the melt? We don't know. It's complicated. There are people pro and con about it. It's a big fight. There's much at stake. Money and poverty and money and freedom and governmental grants and control and lifestyles and poverty and money. But the historical record shows that the current trend of increasing temperatures began well before the Industrial Revolution. The warming period that we're in, but which may well have been plateauing in 1998, the warming period we're in, Earth's current warming period began in 1695, long before humankind began producing more carbon dioxide through our industry and commerce. Scientists know that glacial retreat melting began in 1800, with retreat full on by 1820, says scientist Jeffrey Wrightstone. From 1695 to 1820, that's the span that the atmosphere heated enough to begin melting the ice. But the point is, Earth's current climate warming trend began in the late 17th century. For you college freshmen, that's the late 1600s. Automobiles were not built until the early 1900s. That's over 200 years of measurable warming. Again, before we could have, through CO2 production, contributed. What is significant about all this? Again, scientist Gregory Wrightstone says that since the glaciers began melting in the 1800s, there has been no acceleration in the rate of retreat, despite what Michael Mann's hockey stick graph says. I touched on that hockey stick graph in an earlier episode. And then things start to get complicated, because glaciers don't only get smaller through warmer temperatures. Glaciers are not, scientist Ian Plimmer informs us, glaciers are not thermometers that expand or contract depending upon air temperature. If glaciers are to be melted by an increase in temperature, a monstrous amount of heat needs to be added just to convert ice to water. And Plimmer says ice sheets do not melt from the surface down, they melt at the edges and underneath. He also repeated, ice sheets do not just simply grow or melt in response to global temperature, end quote. There are other things that can affect glaciers. There are dynamics like humidity, slope, and that slope can be downhill or uphill, can affect a glacier. Snowfall, the weight of snow can press down and thin an ice sheet. Things like landslides, solar radiation, ice creep, ice evaporation, all of that plays a role in the span of a glacier's existence. And Plimmer notes that some ice sheets are advancing, others are retreating, others are static. It's complicated. And further conflabbing the matter, the existence of underwater volcanoes. Those underwater volcanoes continually provide heat, hot water, and hot gases. At times they erupt, and too frequently, adds Plimmer, the role of polar volcanoes is unknown, but they are never considered in climate models. It's complicated stuff. And I'm going to bet you didn't know this. I sure didn't. In Antarctica, ice sheets and sea ice are expanding. Is your seatbelt fastened? The ice down there is expanding. True, in Greenland it's decreasing, but in Antarctica the ice is rising. In the past, the northern Arctic is warming, or it was. Plimmer says that data from 125 Arctic land stations and numerous drifting buoys shows that no warming has occurred since 1937, end quote. But it's interesting, between the two, Antarctica and the Arctic, there is a millennial scale polar seesaw, Plimmer says, a back and forth swelling and falling between our polar extremes. And finally, because this goes to the meme of the poor, solitary polar bear standing tiptoed on a melting iceberg, just because ice melts, Plimmer writes, just because ice melts does not necessarily mean that sea levels will rise, as there are a large number of other processes that influence sea level change. End quote. It's not always a one-for-one. I mean, you guys, it's complicated. So, are Earth's glaciers contracting or expanding? The honest answer is yes. Sometimes they're expanding, sometimes they're contracting. During Earth's last ice age, the glaciation waxed and waned hundreds of times. Data shows that over the past 800,000 years, the ice sheets took about 90,000 years to grow and 10,000 years to shrink. And glaciologists,
Sweetheart, What do you want to be when you grow up? A glaciologist, Mommy.
Glaciologists, Plimmer clarifies, still do not understand how subtle shifts in solar radiation at the top of the atmosphere are converted to massive changes in the ice volume on the ground. There's so much that's not known. But what we do know, ice ages are hard on humanity. The last ice age, from the 13th century to the early 19th century, was characterized by solar inactivity. Again, from last show, we realized that the sun has by far the greatest effect on climate. The sun's rays blast away, or not, cosmic dust, and it all affects the formation of clouds. But during that last ice age, it was cold for people here on Earth. And it led, historians say, to crop failure, famine, disease, war, and depopulation. There was social disruption, and hungry, wandering climate refugees resorted to cannibalism. During that ice age, the Vikings on Greenland died out. It wasn't a good time to live. Warm is better for humanity's flourish than ice. It's that simple. But these ice ages and interglacial seasons of history have commonly woven themselves through Earth's story. The last massive ice age began 116,000 years ago. And during that ice age, the snowline levels around the world were, on average, 2,900 feet lower than they are today. Air temperatures at Earth's glaciers was 41 degrees Fahrenheit colder than today. Where forests once stood, thick vegetation came in and took it over, moving the forest to still lower elevations. Areas like the Amazon, which we think of as heavily forested, they became grasslands. In Europe, the forests began to disappear. Something like 107,000 years ago, cold water began to flow into the North Atlantic Ocean. And this all led to increased snowfall, which increased the size of glaciers, which caused the average sea level to drop, since the water was not being recycled back into the oceans. But all around the Earth, then as now, the ice sheets increased and then decreased in size, ebbed and flowed. The lack of rainfall in that ice age caused the areas of Australia, Asia, the Americas, and Africa all to experience massive sand dunes. And those same areas became windswept by cold air. That's a common feature of glacial eras. Stretches of the planet that are not covered by glaciers can nevertheless be barren, windy, arid. And it's interesting, an ice age can happen fast. That last massive ice age, 116,000 years ago, scientists say it started over a 400-year period following an interglacial age like ours. And that especially intense cold snap, ice age, occurred from about 12,900 to 11,500 years ago. It's known as the Younger Dryas age. During the Younger Dryas, the icy global span parts of Greenland were 60 degrees colder than today. Brrr. Over in England, beetle fossils show that temperatures dropped 60 degrees colder than today, with the result that England saw glaciers scattered across the land 11,000 years ago. And that Younger Dryas era came on in less than 100 years. Plimmer says it might have only taken a decade. How'd that happen? What caused it? Well, it might have been astronomical. Tree ring studies show that there was a steep rise in the concentration of carbon-14. An increase like that can only occur with an increased bombardment of the surface of the Earth by cosmic rays, decreased solar activity, or both. There's the sun and cosmic rays and have an effect on the Earth again. But that theory is validated, Plimmer says, by deep sea and ice core measurements that show increases in carbon-14, beryllium-10, and chlorine-36, all of which form by cosmic ray bombardment of the atmosphere and Earth. It's not entirely clear that cosmic bombardment is the answer to why the Younger Dryas age started, Plimmer says, because it's also possible that a meteorite hit Earth. A possibility given the existence of certain, he says, chemical fingerprints, microdiamonds, and glassy spheres from vaporized and molten rock, all evidence of a meteorite strike. And complicating things still further about the Younger Dryas era is that cold periods appear to have started in Antarctica 1,000 years before the Younger Dryas era began. Amazing, mysterious, amazing, so weird. I find all that Ice Age stuff fascinating. For some 15 years with my wife and kids, we'd drive out of the OC, go up through Bishop, California, over the pass. I spent 20 minutes looking for the name of that pass online. No luck. But you go up and over into Nevada, and then we'd go up through Nevada and then southeast Oregon on our way to Boise, Idaho. And that 15-hour drive, well, was 15 back then, because for more than a decade the speed limit in speed regressive Oregon for 120 miles was 55 miles per hour. Today it's 65 miles per hour and it saves 45 minutes across that trip. I mean, you're riding along barren Nevada and you cross some invisible line and you're in Oregon and the barren road quality's the same, the view's essentially the same, but you're required to slow by 10 miles per hour. Oh, it was so irritating. Where was I? Oh yeah, describing a long day's drive across a chunk of the West, monstrous sweeping glacial valleys. Magnificent spans of rock and land on steady gradients that would stretch for anywhere from 2 to 10 miles wide, all carved out across thousands of years by slow-moving ice rivers. It looked like someone had hired thousands of earth movers to perfectly sculpt an ever-increasing gradient. In my eye, it had a certain beauty, maybe a geometric beauty to it. And that ice, because it would, as it crawled along, pick up minerals and dirt and debris and rocks, that ice would leave massive boulders all alone out in the empty fields. We'd drive by hundreds of flat miles of sagebrush, again from the OC to Idaho, and interspersed there'd be huge boulders. They'd look like a big giant forgot them and left them behind in the field because they didn't fit there, out in some wide, open expanse of land, a lone boulder or 5. And to me, it's all mesmerizing. I'm filled with wonder by the beauty and mystery of God's creation, and I hope one of the uptakes of this series is that you are too. Thanks for joining me. Please, everyone, go now and turn your beautiful God-given brains on.